The land lay wide and green, stretching as far as the eyes could see. It was a place where tall trees whispered to the wind, rivers sang softly as they flowed, and the sun painted the hills with golden light every morning. This land was more than just a home. It was a story, a living story carried in the songs of the birds, the dance of the leaves, and the footsteps of generations who had walked there long before. For the tribe who lived on this land, every stone, every tree, every river bend held a memory. It was their pride, their identity, and their heart. The people of this tribe lived simply but with great strength. Their homes were built with hands that knew how to shape the earth, using wood, clay, and leaves. Each family had a small hut surrounded by gardens where they grew fruits, vegetables, and healing plants. The air smelled of fresh earth after rain, and at night the stars shone so bright that it felt as if the sky was close enough to touch. The tribe respected the land deeply. They believed the land was a living spirit, a protector and provider. Children learned this from their very first steps. They were taught how to speak to the trees with gentle hands, how to walk softly on the grass, and how to listen to the wind. To them, the land was not just something they owned. It was something they belonged to. In the heart of the village stood a large, round hut, made from strong wood and decorated with hand-carved designs. This was the chief's house. The chief was not only a leader but also a guardian of tradition, a keeper of stories, and a voice of wisdom. He was a man who carried the weight of many generations on his shoulders with kindness and strength. His words were respected like the voice of the river, steady and clear. The chief's daughter was known for her gentle heart and quiet grace. She walked through the village with kindness in her eyes, greeting children and elders alike. Many saw her as a symbol of hope for the tribe's future. Though she was born into leadership, she treated everyone with warmth and care. The tribe had many brave men and wise women, but among them lived a young man who was not born into a family of great power or wealth. He was known simply as Kavi. Kavi grew up at the edge of the village near the riverbank. His father had been a fisherman, and his mother tended to the fields. They lived a humble life, but Kavi grew up surrounded by stories of courage, kindness, and the love for the land. Kavi was not the loudest or the strongest among the young men. He often spent his time alone by the river, watching the water flow and listening to the songs of the forest. But behind his quiet nature was a brave heart. From a young age, he had learned how to track the footprints of animals, how to read the direction of the wind, and how to notice the smallest changes in the land. Where others saw just trees and grass, Kavi saw signs, patterns, and whispers of the earth. The elders often said he had a listening soul. A listening soul, they explained, was more powerful than a loud voice. A listening soul could understand what the land was saying, could feel the warnings in the air before storms came, and could see the signs of change before anyone else. This made Kavi special, though he never thought of himself as someone important. Every evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the tribe gathered around a great fire. The orange flames danced in the night as old men told stories and the women sang songs passed down through generations. Children sat close, their faces glowing in the firelight, their hearts soaking in every word. Kavi always sat a little away from the crowd, but he listened carefully. These stories shaped his heart. They taught him about loyalty, honor, and love for the land. The tribe's life followed the rhythm of nature. They worked when the sun rose and rested when the stars came out. Their hands were always busy, but their hearts were always at peace. They had no grand buildings or golden treasures, but their true wealth was the strength of their people and their bond with the land. One season the winds began to change. The elders noticed it first. The river that once sang softly now carried a slightly different tune. Birds that usually nested near the fields flew in new directions. It was small things like these that told the elders something was shifting beyond the village's borders. Change was coming, and with change came uncertainty. At the evening fire, the chief spoke with a calm but serious voice. "Our land has always been our gift," he said, "but the world beyond our rivers is changing. We must be wise, we must be strong, and above all, we must stay together." The people nodded. They trusted their chief, for he had guided them through many seasons, but in their hearts, they felt the weight of his words. Change often walked silently at first, before showing its face. Kavi felt it too. He would often stand by the river at night, feeling the wind against his face. Something in the air felt different, not in a way that scared him, but in a way that told him a story was about to begin. A big story, one that would shape his life and the life of everyone he loved. One morning the chief walked through the village, visiting families and speaking with the elders. Kavi saw him from a distance and quietly followed, not out of curiosity but because something in his heart told him that soon, everyone's path would cross in unexpected ways. The chief noticed Kavi and called him closer. "Kavi," the chief said with a kind smile, "you walk like the river, quiet but strong. You see the world with eyes that do not rush. That is a gift. Do not forget it." Kavi bowed his head respectfully. "I am just one man, chief," he replied softly. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes one man can hold the strength of 100 when his heart listens to what is right. Kavi did not fully understand the meaning of those words, but they stayed with him. They settled deep in his heart like seeds waiting to grow. The tribe continued its daily life, planting, fishing, dancing, and singing. But beneath their laughter and songs was a quiet question that no one said aloud. What change was coming? And how would it shape their future? Kavi did not know that he would soon be at the center of that change. He was a simple young man who had never led a group or stood in front of the tribe. Yet life often chooses the quiet ones for the loudest stories. The days grew warmer, and the forest air carried a stillness that was unusual. The children played, but the elders watched the horizon more carefully. Even the chief's daughter, who loved to walk among the gardens, spent more time listening to the chief speak with the elders in hushed voices. One night, as the stars filled the sky, Kavi lay on the soft grass near the river, staring upward. The stars looked brighter than usual. The moon shone like a silver shield. In the silence, he made a quiet promise to himself, to always protect the land that had given him everything. His home, his people, his heart. He didn't know that this promise would soon be tested in ways he had never imagined. But in that moment under the stars, it was just a young man and the land he loved. And sometimes that is where the greatest stories are born. Not in loud places, but in the quiet of a single promise made to something bigger than oneself. The next morning, the chief gathered the entire tribe at the great tree in the center of the village. This tree was older than anyone could remember. Its roots spread deep into the earth, and its branches reached toward the sky. To the tribe, it was a symbol of strength and connection. The chief stood beneath its shade. "Listen well," he began. "There may be times ahead when we will need to remember who we are. We are people of this land. We are the children of the forest, the river, and the stars. We must stand together." As he spoke, Kavi stood among the crowd, not realizing that fate had quietly begun to weave his name into the tribe's story. A story of courage, a story of heart, a story that would be remembered long after the fire had turned to ashes and the night songs had faded into mourning. And so the wind carried the chief's words through the village like a whisper of what was to come. A story was beginning, one that would test loyalty, awaken courage, and remind everyone that sometimes a single heart can make a difference. The sun rose slowly the next morning, shining softly over the village. The air carried a quiet stillness, the kind that makes people stop and listen even when they don't know why. It was the beginning of a new day, yet something in the air felt different, like the earth was whispering a secret that only a few could hear. The tribe woke up as they always did. Women moved gracefully between their gardens, gathering fresh leaves and herbs. Children laughed as they chased one another through the open fields, their bare feet making soft marks in the soil. Men prepared their tools for the day's work, sharpening wooden sticks, fixing nets, and checking their fields. Everything looked the same, but deep inside many hearts, a quiet uneasiness began to grow. The chief stood beneath the great tree in the center of the village. His wise eyes scanned the land. He had seen many seasons come and go, and he knew when the wind carried more than just a breeze. There was something in the stillness of the forest, in the way the birds had grown quieter, in the way the river's song had changed. These were signs only those who truly listened could understand. Kavi walked toward the river as he always did. The river was his friend, his teacher, and his quiet listener. When he had questions in his heart, he came here. When he was unsure, he came here. He knelt near the water, dipping his hands into the cool stream. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the fresh air. But even here, where he usually felt peace, something didn't feel the same. The water seemed slower. The wind carried a strange heaviness. He looked at the trees across the river and saw how their leaves hardly moved, even though the morning breeze usually played among them. Kavi was not a man of many words, but his heart felt the change. As he walked back to the village, he saw small groups of people talking in low voices. The elders sat close together, their faces serious. It was rare to see them so quiet. Usually their mornings were filled with laughter and stories about the old days. Kavi quietly sat nearby listening. "We must prepare," one elder said. "The signs are too clear," another replied. "The land is trying to speak to us," said a third softly. Their words stirred something inside Kavi. He had grown up listening to stories about how the land spoke, not through loud noises, but through changes in wind, water, and silence. He wondered what it was trying to say now. Later that day, the chief called everyone together. Men, women, and children gathered under the great tree. The birds flew away as if they knew something important was about to be said. The chief's deep, calm voice filled the air. "My people," he began, "we have lived many peaceful seasons on this land. We have sung with the birds, grown our food with the rain, and danced with the wind. But the world beyond our rivers is moving. We must listen carefully. We must be wise." The people listened closely. Even the children were quiet. "The forest has grown silent," the chief continued. "The river speaks a different song. These are signs. We do not yet know what is coming, but we must not ignore them. A people who love their land must always stand together when change arrives." His words were gentle but carried weight. Kavi watched the chief closely. He had always respected him, but today the chief's voice felt different. It carried a seriousness that wrapped around everyone like a soft but unshakable blanket. In the days that followed, the village moved carefully. Men worked in the fields but kept their eyes on the distance. Women continued their daily tasks but stayed closer to the village. The children were told to play near the great tree where the elders could watch them. Kavi spent more time at the edges of the forest. He wasn't ordered to do it. His heart simply told him to watch. He noticed small things others might have missed. Broken twigs where the forest floor had been quiet for months, new footprints near the edge of the river that didn't belong to their people, and the way the animals seemed to be moving deeper into the forest rather than closer to the water. He spoke to an elder about it. "Something is changing," Kavi said softly. The elder nodded slowly. "The land always speaks first to those who listen. Do not ignore what you see, Kavi. A time may come when your eyes will help guide us." Those words stayed with him. They were not loud words, but they were heavy. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, the chief and the elders gathered around the fire. The entire tribe joined them. The chief spoke once more, his voice steady. "Long ago," he said, "our ancestors faced times when the land tested their hearts. It was not through storms or floods, but through the choices they made when shadows appeared at the edge of their homes. They stood together, not because they were many, but because they were united. We must be the same." People murmured in agreement, but the air carried both hope and worry. No one knew what kind of change was coming. Kavi's eyes moved around the crowd. Many looked at the chief for guidance. Others whispered quietly to one another. He saw the chief's daughter sitting near the fire, listening with calm eyes but holding her hands tightly together in her lap. She too could feel it, the silent wave of uncertainty touching everyone. The next morning, the chief called for volunteers to keep watch at the edges of the forest. Several strong young men stepped forward. They carried themselves proudly, their faces showing quiet determination. Kavi stood silently at the back, watching. He was not as big or loud as the others, but his heart was steady. He didn't need to be called. He simply walked forward. The chief looked at him and gave a small nod. "A man who listens to the land is as valuable as a man with a strong arm," he said, so Kavi joined the group. Day by day, they walked along the borders of the village, listening, watching, and learning from the quiet signs of the earth. The trees whispered in ways that only a few could understand. The forest wasn't dangerous, but it was watchful, like it was waiting for something to happen. One night, when the moon was bright and silver, Kavi sat near the river again. The air was still. He closed his eyes and listened, not just with his ears but with his heart. In that silence he felt something stronger than before. It wasn't fear. It was a quiet warning, like the land telling him to be ready. The next morning he shared what he felt with the elder. The elder didn't laugh or dismiss his words. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on Kavi's shoulder and said, "When the land chooses someone to listen, it is not a small thing. Be ready, Kavi. Your heart may be called upon sooner than you think." Meanwhile, the chief's daughter spent her time helping the elders prepare food and medicines. She noticed the way people moved with more care now, how laughter had grown softer. She admired Kavi from a distance, not because of loud strength, but because he carried a calmness she trusted. In the quiet moments of the day, she often stood near the great tree and looked toward the forest, wondering what kind of story was about to unfold. As more days passed, signs became clearer. Birds that once nested near the village began leaving. The air carried a new scent, not unpleasant but unfamiliar. Some said it was the scent of change. Others said it was the scent of something from beyond the river. One afternoon, the chief gathered the tribe once again. His voice was clear. "We do not run from change. We meet it together. No matter what stands before us, we remember this land is part of us. We are its voice." The people felt stronger hearing his words. And in that moment, as everyone stood together beneath the great tree, Kavi realized something quietly powerful. The tribe was not made strong by numbers. It was made strong by hearts that stood side by side. He looked up at the sky. The wind moved gently through the branches. He didn't know what was waiting beyond the trees, but he knew this. Whatever came, he would not walk away from it. The river had always taught him something simple. When the water meets a rock, it does not stop. It finds a way to keep flowing, and like the river, he would find his way. The sun rose behind a pale gray sky. The wind felt different that morning, heavier, slower, as if it carried a message that everyone could sense but no one could fully understand. The village was quiet, more quiet than usual. The birds that normally sang at sunrise were nowhere to be heard. Even the river's song felt softer, like it was holding its breath. Kavi walked to the river as he had done every morning, but his steps were not as light as before. The air carried a feeling he could not name. He bent down and touched the water with his fingertips. The river was cool, calm, and still. He closed his eyes and tried to listen with his heart the way the elders had taught him. A soft breeze touched his face, and for a brief moment, he felt the land whisper to him as if saying, "The time has come." When he returned to the village, he saw the chief standing near the great tree with the elders. They were not smiling. Their faces were calm but serious. The chief's daughter stood a few steps away, her hands folded gently in front of her. People began to gather even before the chief called them. They could feel something in the air. The chief spoke in his slow, wise way. "My people, the land has spoken. Change is not far away now. We do not know everything that is coming, but we can feel it in the wind, in the quiet of the forest, and in the river that no longer sings the same. This is the moment when hearts must be steady, and courage must rise like the morning sun." No one spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the leaves above their heads. It was not the kind of silence that comes from fear. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone is listening deeply. The chief lifted his eyes toward the forest. "The signs are clear. Our land may be tested, but remember what our ancestors taught us. Strength is not only in numbers, but in the love we hold for this soil beneath our feet. When we stand together, the land stands with us." The elders nodded, and the people stood a little taller. Their faces were calm, but their hearts beat faster. It was not easy to face the unknown, but their connection to the land was strong. Kavi walked to the edge of the forest later that day. The wind moved through the trees, but the forest was strangely quiet. He remembered the elders' words. The land always speaks to those who listen. He listened now with everything inside him. He noticed the branches swaying in a pattern that seemed to guide his eyes toward a small clearing. He had walked this path many times, but today it felt new, as if the land itself was showing him the way. The air grew cooler. The sound of the river faded behind him. He stepped into the clearing and stood very still. He didn't see anyone, but he felt something deep in his chest. A quiet, knowing. It was as if the land was reminding him, "This is the moment your heart was waiting for." Kavi walked back to the village slowly. His steps were firm, but inside his heart he felt both courage and a small seed of fear. Not fear of danger, but fear of the unknown. When he reached the village, the chief was speaking again with the elders. Kavi stepped forward, not waiting to be called. "I want to help," Kavi said softly. The chief turned to him. His eyes, deep and wise, met Kavi's. "I know," the chief said gently. "The land has chosen its listener well. When a man listens to the earth with an honest heart, the earth listens back. That is a gift, Kavi, and with a gift comes a time to use it." Kavi bowed his head slightly. He didn't have fancy words. He didn't need them. His heart spoke louder than anything he could say. The chief gathered the tribe once more that evening. A soft orange glow from the fire lit their faces. The stars were beginning to appear, and the great tree stood tall behind them, its leaves whispering softly in the night. "We have been given a land that breathes with us," the chief said. "It has carried us through many seasons. Tonight we show it that we stand with it, as it has always stood with us. We must not let fear guide us. We must let love and courage lead the way." He turned to Kavi. "This young man listens to the land as our ancestors did. He will stand at the edge of our home as the first guardian, not because we order him, but because his heart already chose this path. He does not stand alone. When one heart stands with courage, the land stands with him." The people looked at Kavi with quiet respect. He was not the strongest man, not the loudest, not a warrior in the way some imagined. But they saw the calm in his eyes, and that calm became their strength too. Kavi walked to the river that night with the stars above him. He looked at the sky, remembering all the quiet mornings he had spent listening to the wind. He thought about his father, his mother, the elders, the children who ran through the fields. This land had given him everything, his home, his peace, and his story. Now it was asking him to give something back, his courage. He whispered softly to the river, "I will not turn away." The water rippled gently, as if answering him. The chief's daughter came quietly to stand beside him. She did not speak for a long time. They both looked at the water, feeling the same quiet weight in the air. Finally, she said, "The land believes in you." Kavi turned his head slightly and gave a small smile. "I believe in it too," he replied. The next morning, Kavi walked to the edge of the forest as the sun began to rise. The village watched him from behind the great tree. No one shouted or sang. Their silence was a song in itself, a song of trust, hope, and unity. The forest stood tall and still before him, like a wise friend waiting for someone to step forward. Kavi took a deep breath. He didn't carry fancy things with him. He carried only his quiet strength, his eyes that had learned to see the land's whispers, and his promise to stand. Hours passed slowly. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Kavi felt the wind moving gently around him as if wrapping him in a soft embrace. He listened to every sound, the rustle of the leaves, the movement of small creatures, the soft heartbeat of the land. And then he felt it, the change. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a crash or a storm. It was a soft shift, like a door opening somewhere beyond the trees. The land was speaking to him again. It was telling him, "Stand steady. This is the moment." He stood taller, his feet firm on the ground. His heart beat strongly, but he was not afraid. He knew he wasn't alone. Behind him was his village, his people, and the spirit of the land itself. Back at the great tree, the chief stood with the elders. They watched Kavi with eyes that held both hope and pride. He reminded them of the old stories, the quiet guardians who stood when the land called. The chief's daughter stood at the front of the crowd, her hands held together. She didn't speak, but her heart whispered its own prayer into the wind. The day slowly turned into evening. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and pink. Kavi remained at the forest's edge, listening. The air felt alive with quiet energy. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he had done what many could not. He had faced the unknown without running from it. When he returned to the village that night, the people greeted him with silent warmth. No one needed to cheer. Their eyes said everything. They saw in him something greater than strength. They saw courage born from love. The chief stepped forward and placed a hand on Kavi's shoulder. "You stood when the land called. That is something our people will remember for generations," he said. Kavi lowered his eyes, humble and quiet. "I only listened," he replied. The chief smiled gently. And that is what makes your heart strong. Sometimes the greatest bravery is not in speaking loudly, but in listening deeply and standing when no one else does. That night, the fire in the center of the village burned brighter than ever. The tribe sat together, their faces glowing in the warm light. The elders began to tell new stories, stories that would one day become the songs of the next generation. And among those stories, one began to form. The story of a quiet young man who listened to the land and stood when it whispered his name. The stars shone brightly above as if watching over them. The land had chosen its moment, and Kavi had answered with his heart. The river flowed softly nearby. The forest stood silent but alive, and in the warmth of that night something changed in the hearts of the people. They understood more deeply than ever. Their strength was not only in their hands but in their bond with their land, with each other, and with the quiet courage that lived in hearts like Kavi's. The next morning the sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. The air felt lighter than the night before, but it still carried a quiet weight, like the land itself was holding a deep breath. The tribe woke up earlier than usual. No one needed to call them. They simply felt it was a day that mattered. The chief stood near the great tree, watching the forest beyond the fields. The elders joined him, their faces calm and thoughtful. For many days the tribe had waited, watched, and listened to the quiet signs around them. Now they stood not as many voices, but as one heart. Kavi stepped out of his small hut and looked around the village. The faces of the people were different today. There was still worry, but there was also something stronger. Trust. They trusted their land, their chief, and quietly they trusted him too. He walked toward the river as he always did, to let the cool water touch his hands. The river was calm, its surface shining like a mirror under the morning light. He closed his eyes and whispered a soft, "Thank you," to the water. The forest beyond the river was silent, but it was no longer a silence of fear. It was the silence that comes before something new begins. Birds began to return to the trees, their songs cautious but hopeful. Even the wind carried a softer sound now, like a gentle hand resting on the shoulders of the village. The chief called the people together. Children gathered at the front, their small faces looking up with wide eyes. Mothers stood behind them, holding their hands gently. The elders took their usual places near the fire pit, and the men who had walked the forest edges stood close, their hearts steady. The chief's voice rose in the morning air. "My people," he began, "our land has been whispering to us for many days. We have watched with open eyes, we have listened with open hearts, and we have not turned away. Today we stand together not just as a tribe, but as a family held by this land." The people nodded quietly. He continued, "There was a time when our ancestors faced moments like this, and in those moments they did not choose fear. They chose unity. They chose hope. They chose to remember who they were. We must do the same." He turned his eyes toward Kavi. This young man stood at the edge of the forest, not with a loud voice, but with a quiet strength. He listened when others doubted, and because of his heart, the land listened back. He became the bridge between our people and the whispers of the earth. That is something that will be remembered. A soft murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. Kavi stood humbly among them. He had never imagined his name would be spoken in this way. He was just a simple young man who loved the river, the forest, and the quiet songs of the wind. But sometimes love and courage can turn ordinary steps into extraordinary paths. The chief raised his hand and said, "Today we give thanks, not for what we have gained, but for the bond that has grown stronger among us. Our strength is not in the size of our tribe, but in the love we share for this land. We are its voice, and it is our shelter." The tribe began to hum a soft song, a song that was older than anyone could remember. It was not a song of victory. It was a song of connection, a way of speaking to the land, thanking it for standing with them. The elders lit a small fire in the center of the village. The flames flickered gently, sending thin smoke into the sky. People brought baskets of fruits, herbs, flowers, and water to place around the fire. These were not offerings of fear. They were gifts of gratitude. Kavi stood near the fire, the warmth touching his face. He thought about the night he spent alone at the edge of the forest. He thought about the whispers in the wind, the stillness of the river, and the way the land had felt alive around him. It was as if the earth itself had trusted him to stand, and he had. The chief's daughter walked toward him quietly. She wore a simple dress woven with soft colors of the forest, Her steps were graceful, and her face carried the calm strength of someone who believed in the good of people. She looked at Kavi and smiled softly. "You didn't just listen to the land," she said. "You gave the rest of us the courage to listen too." Kavi lowered his eyes, unsure how to answer. "I only did what my heart told me," he said quietly. "And that," she replied gently, "is why your heart is strong." The day passed slowly, filled with quiet moments that wrapped around the tribe like a warm blanket. The children played near the great tree again, their laughter returning to the air. Women prepared food, their hands moving with ease. The men shared quiet words near the fields, their faces brighter than they had been in many days. The forest, which once felt like it held a question, now felt like it was at peace. Birds sang louder, and the wind carried their songs into the village. It was as if the land was breathing with them, smiling with them, whispering, "You listened well." That evening, the chief called the people once again under the great tree. The sky above was filled with stars, bright and clear. The air was warm and soft. Everyone gathered around the fire as they always had, but tonight felt different. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter. The chief looked at Kavi and spoke slowly so that every word would stay in their hearts. "Our land does not give us easy paths. It gives us moments to grow, and when one person steps forward with courage, the whole tribe moves forward with him. Kavi, your quiet steps have reminded us of this truth." He paused, then turned to the people. "Our ancestors had a way of honoring those who stood for the land, not with gold or treasure, but with trust. Today we honor Kavi with something far greater than riches. We honor him with our respect, with our hearts, and with the bond that ties us together." A soft cheer rose among the people, not loud or wild, but warm like a wave of light. The chief's daughter stepped forward and stood beside Kavi. Her eyes shone like the river at sunrise. The chief smiled at them both. "In our tribe," he said, "when a person's heart becomes part of the land's story, they become part of its legacy. Tonight I give my daughter to Kavi as wife, not because of power or wealth, but because his heart stood strong when the land called. This is not a reward. It is a joining of two lives, a symbol of unity between courage and leadership." A gentle sound of joy filled the air. People smiled. Some clapped softly, some wiped tears from their eyes. The chief's daughter lowered her head shyly, her cheeks warm, while Kavi stood quietly, overwhelmed but grateful. The elders began a new song, one they only sang during moments of great meaning. The sound rose into the night sky, blending with the whisper of the wind and the crackling of the fire. Kavi felt a warmth in his chest, not from the fire, but from something deeper. He had never sought honor or recognition. All he had ever wanted was to protect the land he loved. And now, that land had become part of his story in a way he never imagined. As the night grew deeper, the tribe continued to celebrate in their gentle way. Some danced softly near the fire. Others shared stories of the past, linking old memories with new beginnings. The children watched wide-eyed, knowing they were seeing a moment that would be told for generations. Kavi stood near the river again later that night, the moonlight shining on the water. The chief's daughter walked to his side and stood with him in silence. The river's song had returned, soft and beautiful, flowing like a promise. "This land," Kavi whispered, "it feels alive again." She smiled. "It always was," she said softly. "It just needed someone to remind us how to listen." They stood there for a long time, not needing many words. The forest, the river, the wind, all of it felt like a friend wrapping its arms around them. When they returned to the fire, the tribe welcomed them with warm smiles. There was no grand crown, no throne, no loud praise. Just a circle of people, a bond of hearts, and the whisper of the land that said, "You are one." The night ended with the tribe sleeping peacefully, wrapped in the quiet safety of their home. The stars watched over them, and the great tree stood tall like a guardian. Kavi lay down in his hut, listening to the soft sounds of the village. He knew his life would never be the same again, not because of glory, but because he had found his place, not just in the tribe, but in the heartbeat of the land itself. Many seasons passed after that unforgettable night. The village slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but something inside it had changed forever. It was not a loud change. It was a soft, deep change, like a tree growing strong roots beneath the ground where no one could see but everyone could feel. The people still woke with the rising sun. The women still worked in their gardens. The men still watched over the fields, and the children still laughed as they ran through the open spaces. But now every task was done with a greater sense of belonging. The land no longer felt like something they simply lived on. It felt like a living friend who walked beside them. Kavi and the chief's daughter began their new life together quietly, without grand ceremonies or loud celebrations. Their bond was built not on power or riches, but on something much stronger: trust, courage, and shared love for the land. They spent their mornings walking through the fields, listening to the songs of the birds and watching the river flow. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. Their silence was not empty. It was full of understanding. The elders often said that when two hearts are connected not just to each other but also to the earth beneath them, their story becomes part of the land itself. And so it was with Kavi and his wife. Their love became another quiet song the village would remember. The chief grew older, his hair turning white like the mist that floated above the river in early mornings, but his eyes remained warm and strong. He often sat beneath the great tree, watching the people go about their day. The chief had always believed that true leadership was not about standing above others but standing with them. And in Kavi, he saw a heart that understood this deeply. Over time, Kavi became someone the people naturally turned to, not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it with his calm strength. When the forest grew quiet again, they asked for his thoughts. When the river changed its song, they came to him to listen. He never gave orders. He simply spoke with honesty, and his words carried weight because they came from a place of love. The chief's daughter stood beside him always, not behind him. She too was loved by the people. She brought hope wherever she walked, reminding the tribe that leadership was also kindness, and that strength could be gentle. The seasons continued to change, each one bringing its own beauty. In spring, flowers covered the fields like a soft blanket. In summer, the river sparkled under the bright sun. In autumn, golden leaves fell like whispers of old stories. And in winter, the cold air carried the warmth of firelight and songs sung around the great tree. During these seasons, children grew up listening to the story of Kavi. They knew it not as a tale of war or fear, but as a story of quiet courage. The elders told them how one man listened to the whispers of the land when others only heard silence. They told them how his heart stood strong when the world seemed uncertain. And they told them how love and unity gave the tribe a new strength that would last for generations. When the children played near the river, they often imagined they could hear what Kavi had once heard. They touched the water gently, closed their eyes, and whispered to the wind. They wanted to feel the land's voice, too. And sometimes, in the stillness of the afternoon, they felt a soft breeze brush against their faces, as if the land was answering back. The chief eventually passed on his leadership to Kavi. The ceremony was simple, held beneath the great tree. No gold was given, no loud drums were beaten. Instead, the chief placed his walking stick, carved from the wood of the oldest tree, into Kavi's hands. The people stood around in a circle, their faces calm but filled with trust. "You have listened well," the chief said softly, "and because you have listened, the land has trusted you. This stick is not a symbol of power. It is a reminder that a leader walks with the people, not above them. Guide them as the river guides its water." Softly but surely, Kavi bowed his head. He felt the weight of the stick not as a burden but as a promise to the land, to the people, and to the quiet whispers that had once called his name at the forest's edge. As the new chief, Kavi did not change the ways of the tribe. He simply strengthened what was already beautiful. He made sure the children continued learning to listen to the land. He encouraged the young to spend time near the river, the forest, and the fields, not just to work but to understand. He reminded everyone that their true strength was their bond with one another and with the world around them. Under his guidance, the village grew more united. Neighbors helped one another without being asked. Elders were treated with respect, and their wisdom was treasured like a precious gift. The riverbanks were kept clean, the trees were cared for, and the songs of the land grew louder in their hearts. Years went by, but the memory of that quiet moment when Kavi had stood at the forest's edge never faded. People spoke of it around fires, beneath stars, and during celebrations. It became part of their identity, not as a tale of danger, but as a reminder of what courage truly means. Kavi and his wife grew older together. Their love did not fade. It grew like the great tree, deeper, stronger, and more beautiful with time. Children and grandchildren gathered around them, listening to their quiet stories, feeling their warmth. Every evening they walked to the river together, just as they had in their younger days. The river never stopped flowing. It carried the songs of the land and the whispers of countless stories. Sometimes Kavi would close his eyes, feeling the same soft breeze on his face that had touched him long ago. It reminded him of the moment when everything changed, not through force but through faith. He often told the children, "The land speaks to all of us. You only need to be quiet enough to listen. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is as soft as the wind, as steady as the river." And the children believed him, because they saw the truth of his words in the world around them. The great tree in the center of the village grew even taller as the years passed. Its roots spread wide, holding the earth like a gentle embrace. It became a place where stories were told, songs were sung, and promises were made. People often touched its bark and whispered small wishes, believing the land would hear them. As time moved forward, new leaders were chosen, but the story of Kavi remained at the heart of the tribe's identity. They called him the listener of the land. His story was not carved into stone, but carried in hearts, in songs, and in the soft steps of children running through the fields. When Kavi grew very old, his hair silver like moonlight, he spent most of his days near the river. His wife sat beside him, and they watched the water flow. They spoke little because after a lifetime of love, their silence said everything. One clear night, as the stars shone brighter than usual, the village gathered around the great tree again. They sang the same old song, the song of connection, courage, and love for the land. Kavi sat near the fire listening. His heart was full. He looked at the faces around him, the young, the old, the ones who had grown up hearing his story. He saw how the tribe had grown stronger not through walls or weapons, but through kindness, trust, and their bond with the earth. And in that moment, he understood something deeply. Even when he would no longer walk on this soil, the story would live on. The whispers of the land would find new ears. The river would flow for new generations. The great tree would keep growing. And somewhere, a new heart would rise to listen, just as his had once done. Kavi smiled softly, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. His story was not about him alone. It was about a people who chose unity over fear, and love over doubt. That night the stars seemed to shine lower, as if they too were listening. And so the story of Kavi, the quiet young man who listened to the land, became a legend not written in books, but in the wind, in the river's song, and in the beating hearts of the tribe. Generations later, children would still gather around the fire, and elders would say, long ago, when the forest grew quiet, one man listened, and because he listened, we still stand here today. The land continued to breathe with them, whispering softly, always ready to speak to the next person who would stop long enough to hear. And so, the river flowed. The great tree stood tall. The wind carried stories from one heart to another. And the legacy of Kavi lived on, not as a distant tale, but as a living heartbeat in the land itself.